like end of 2013 to beginning of 2014 for another 6 months. I went to work for Wizards of the Coast, which is the company that makes the game. And I thought that might be like a, life-changing career opportunity, but ended up missing like definitely the tournament aspect and the competing side of things. And to some extent, like the content creation side of things too.
Yeah, because when you're at Wizard, you can't write any content, right?
Yeah, the rules were different then. I think it's they're a little bit more relaxed on things now. So Andrew Brown is a person I did a podcast with for a while. He ended up going to Wizards of the Coast, and I had him back on the podcast at some point as a Wizards employee, where he was like talking about Magic cards and the design of them and the strategy that people were using in current formats. And like when I was working there, 5 years earlier, like I would have gotten fired if I did something like that. So
that's a good segue to go into like the working for WOTC though. What did they approach you after? Like how did that come about? Like, did they poach you from when you were competing and playing on the circuit?
So Magic is very weird in that they have/had these series of tournaments. They've cut back on them in recent years, or whatever. So they had like these open tournaments where anyone could join, and folks who did well in those tournaments would qualify for like a smaller tournament. And if you did really well in those tournaments consistently, like that's when you're kind of like making decent money, you're getting some notoriety. And the Wizards employees, the game designers, like professional game designers, would go to those big tournaments. And a lot of the Wizards folks were former tournament players themselves. So they had like a lot of relationships with some people, or maybe there would be like these new kids coming up who had formed relationships with the old guard, and that old guard was friends with the Wizards person. So you'd have, these 35-year-old now professional game designers for 10 years getting introduced to a 20-year-old kid who is like clearly very smart and talented at Magic by his friend who they used to play tournaments together with or something. It's very strange. And it's like, that's kind of how they hire people in a lot of aspects for the game development side of things, as far as like, tweaking the cards and figuring out the really minutia bits of everything, where you're trying to make everything like pretty balanced and pretty fair. And it usually takes someone with a good understanding of competitive Magic to be able to do that. So they just like poach people from the tournaments. It's kind of strange.
What were some like new skills that you had to learn from going from being really good at the game to actually designing like aspects of the game?
It's way different, because for competing in tournaments, your mindset is mostly about like, what sort of like tiny details can I alter to get as big of an edge as possible? And that's basically all you're trying to do, is looking for a way to get like a 2 to 5% edge on someone, which granted were things that I was pretty good at, talking about, changing like the last couple cards in a deck, or like sideboarding guides, whatever. I think that was kind of where I excelled. And for game design, it's kind of what I was talking about with regards to content, where not everyone is going to consume Magic that way. And doing that sort of exercise to try and compete in a tournament is not necessarily fun for everyone. So you want to shift your focus kind of like to the everyman, the person who is like most likely to be consuming your game and how they interact with it. And a lot of that is just like, is there a fun deck that exists in this format that I can kind of identify with? And Magic has its own like psychographics and stuff like that. And that was basically my goal going into Wizards, was to try and figure out a way to make it so, some of the worst constructed formats of all time, there's one good deck and everything else is worse than that deck. So you either play something that can beat that deck, or you play the deck itself. And those tend to be like very boring, repetitive experiences for the average gamer. Like they want to get different experiences basically every time they play. And trying to make it so formats don't devolve into that was what I took to mean like my job was going to be. And just trying to think like those folks and try and give them what they want, and how can I best facilitate them having those experiences, and not make sure that, or try and make sure that cards aren't like super egregious or unfun to play against, or create like repetitive or stally play patterns, like learning that no, actually it is good if the game moves forward to a conclusion versus, a control deck that just like counterspells all your stuff and draws a bunch of cards and you concede out of boredom. Just like trying to avoid those situations.
Do you like when you're designing a set, are you are the people at Wizards generally aware of all the different archetypes that exist in there, or are you kind of surprised sometimes with what the community comes up with?
Yeah, I would say it varies. So we did a process called Future League where we would have these card files that were not finished, but our job was to like try and help get them as close to a finished product as possible before they finally got shipped. And we would build decks out of these like very like raw, untuned, untested cards and build decks with them and bash them against each other, kind of trying to figure out like what was the strongest thing to be doing, but not in such a way where it was like, I'm only going to play this thing in the FFL because it's the best deck, because that doesn't really help anything. Like you're trying to learn as much as possible about the format in general. Whereas, you know, Magic in the real world in tournaments, you very much benefit from playing like the best deck over and over.
Yeah, you tunnel vision a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, like just the rewards for each thing are complete 180. So I kind of had to, you know, unlearn everything that I had taught myself. So is
that common for like, because like you said, like they mostly hire pro Magic players to come work on these things. Is it hard to like break that habit and like retrain your brain and then like relearn the process?
It is, but I think if you are a pro Magic player, you are probably pretty smart. And some of that does translate into like, you know, where do you think you're going to be in the next 5 years? And I think a common career path for a pro Magic player is to get a job in game design somewhere. Maybe it's not Wizards of the Coast, but there are like several other studios that recognize like pro Magic player as an accolade and like something that they should be pursuing potentially. And once you think about that, you're like, oh, well, what would I need to do if I wanted to translate this pro Magic career into a game design career? And, you know, we're pretty good at going from A to B and like figuring out the process it takes from A to B. So for me personally, like in 2012 around there, I think I realized that might be a career path for me. And I started actively trying to think in those terms. And I think a lot of my colleagues were doing the same thing, especially since like our friends were just getting hired up a decent amount of the time, you know, and then we would check in with them and kind of ask them the same questions that you're asking me now, and would get a lot of the similar feedback where some people are a little bit better naturally, just intrinsically at the game design side of things than someone who's like a hardcore tournament player. So some people had like an easier time adjusting than others. But I think for me personally, it's probably like one of the harder adjustments.
And your colleagues there, I'm assuming they don't only hire pro Magic players. They must hire some number of people that are more casual or like into like the commander type formats and stuff like that. Is it hard interacting with those type people, like, and explaining like the reason like this card's really good is because like in this deck it would be absolutely insane when they're kind of just saying like, oh, we're just gonna have fun.
So okay, I'm likely gonna forget to answer like part of that question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. So things were again way different in 2013 than they are now. Back then, I think they were like, our development department needs to be pro Magic players. That is laxed to some degree. Now it's like, well, we just need you to show some amount of ability at that level, but it is a bonus if you have these other skills that these other pro Magic players don't have, because a lot of pro Magic players do have a lot of the same skill sets, you know? So it's like you hire 10 of them, you're getting a lot of diminishing returns there, versus if you hire someone who has like played in a few pro tours, maybe top 8 at a couple events, but like, you know, plays a lot of the more casual formats, or is like a really big fan of creating their own formats, things like Cube and stuff like that. You know, it's like, again, like getting the most variety of perspectives is super important. And I was, like I said, I was doing that with, you know, trying to scavenge for information back in the day. So I recognize that. And I think Wizards, now that they're focusing less on like specifically tournament Magic and more on the broader appeal side of things, they recognize the value in not just having pro Magic players in the building, but the development department is also very small. So when I was there, it was like maybe 10 people for Magic. And then the design side of things are, you know, maybe they have Magic results, maybe they don't, but like you have to be very, very good at the design side of things. And they hold like a contest every once in a while called the Great Designer Search.
Oh, yeah.
They just like get all these submissions from the community, and it's just like the best way for them to conduct job interviews and see how much skill you have and how much you could actually bring to the table and stuff like that. So for development, they mostly go from the pro side of things. For design, they find weird ideas of like how to find people, like the Great Designer Search. But also, I think those interviews, you know, when they're just generally hiring people, like you'll get hired from like other game companies and stuff like that. Yeah. But being there and interacting with like all the different folks, like I was interacting with like brand and marketing people on various things. I was definitely interacting with designers on a lot of different things, interacting with like some of the world building, like concept artists, creative story folks on stuff. And it's all incredible because this was like a you know, commonly spouted thing in the Wizards office, at least in like 2013, was that like everyone who works there has a superpower. And I firmly believe that, where just like everyone is in the building because they're so good at doing something that no one else can, or they have a perspective that no one else can have. And I felt like that genuinely talking to like every single person who worked in the building, where it's like, I can understand this person's worth and I know why they're there. And I just want to be surrounded by those people, you know? I would much rather interact with like folks with different perspectives who are all smart and can like teach me something.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your superpower?
Well, I didn't last very long, so I think that you could draw some conclusions there. But I think that I was very good at the position that I kind of positioned myself into, which was mostly keeping track of the future league and relative power level in terms of everything else, and like what kinds of things I think needed to be adjusted, like either up or down. And I think when I left, they realized that what I was bringing to the table there was more valuable than what they realized.
Okay.
So I think I'm very good at that. And granted, I think that they have people who are pretty good at doing that now, for whatever that's worth. But so a couple different things. I was the first person. Normally what they do is like they hire you for a 6-month contract. Okay. And then at the end of that 6 months, your contract will get extended another 6 months. And then at the end of that contract, they either choose to hire you as a full-time employee or not. I was the only person in over a decade who got to their 6-month contract. They offered to extend the contract, and then I chose to leave instead of staying on.
Oh.
So that was kind of weird, where it creates like, you know, some office drama or whatever. People are just like, oh, what happened? Why didn't he stay on? This is the dream job, you know, like, why would he want to leave? Blah, blah, blah. And people were asking me, and I'm just like, ask them. I don't know, you know, like, I'm not trying to, you know, slander anyone or besmirch someone's good name or whatever, but you know, that was also almost 10 years ago. So I can kind of talk about it now. But yeah, I think that they maybe didn't value what I was bringing to the table. And I kind of felt like maybe they're right, because, you know, they know what they're doing. They've been doing this a lot longer than me. And that was kind of one of the first things that I learned is like, if I don't understand something, I should probably just shut up and listen, because they likely know what they're talking about and I don't. So yeah, I was like, I kind of like don't feel like super valued. It's just like the way things were like kind of moving around, and I was like being put on certain projects or taken off of certain projects. Like they made a game called Kaijudo, which was an offshoot of Duel Masters, which was like another IP that they own, which is pretty popular in Japan.
Yeah,
not super popular over here. And I had played Kaijudo a little bit before I started working for Wizards, and I liked the game. And they gave me a chance to spend, I think it was like 5% of my bandwidth to start, or maybe it was like 10% or something, to work on Kaijudo. And I was like, this is awesome. You know, having fun working on this game and Magic. So I get like 2 shots of doing the thing that I like, which is like, you know, building decks and figuring out formats and stuff. And when my 6-month contract came up, they were like, we kind of don't feel like you're doing a great job over here, but like the Kaijudo people love you. So what if you did 50% Magic and 50% Kaijudo? And I was like, I didn't quit playing Magic and making content to work on like half Kaijudo. You know, it's like, I like doing it, but I want to work on Magic, but I also want to feel like valued that I'm working on Magic. So it's just like, if this is the way things are going to be and people are going to want me on their projects like less and less, you know, I don't want to end up just like full-time working on Kaijudo or Duel Masters or whatever. And Kaijudo got canceled like after I left too. So there's that. So yeah, I don't know. It's just like a bunch of stuff where I was like, I miss competing, at least compared to like the experience I'm having at work. And Kaijudo is fun, but like, I don't want it to be my career. And I wish that maybe I was better at doing this Magic stuff so that I would get appreciated more. Or I even wish that like people could tell me what I was doing wrong, because I would have interviews with like, I had like a personal manager and then like a department manager, and I would have like weekly one-on-ones with them. And I'm just like, you know, give me some feedback. They're like, you're doing great. You're doing great. You're doing great. Until they're like, we want to cut your bandwidth by 40%. And it's like, well, clearly I'm not. So like, what the hell?
They didn't give you any feedback, really?
No, they're just like, oh yeah, you know, everyone seems to like you, think you're doing a really good job. And then it just came time to be like, all right, where are we going to put Gerry? And everyone's like, yeah, we don't want him.
Oh, wow. Did you find the work like fulfilling, like personally, or were you just kind of coasting?
I thought it was awesome.
Okay.
It scratched a lot of the itches that I had. Although the thing that kind of troubled me the most was like, I would go home and I would just not know what to do with myself, because normally I would just spend a lot of time, like, you know, looking at decks, playing Magic, whatever. Like, it was my work, but it was also what I did as a hobby. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would just get home and I'm just like, I can't really do this competitive Magic thing anymore. So like, what the hell am I supposed to be doing? And that was just super weird. So I also spent like a lot of time at home, just like looking for something else to scratch that kind of itch. And now there's enough stuff out there where I think I'd be fine in that regard, honestly. But back then I was just like, this Hearthstone game looks stupid. I don't like it.
It's not Magic.
Yeah, it's not Magic. It's just bad Magic, right? And there wasn't a whole lot of stuff like it at that point. So I started playing like the Pokemon video game a little bit competitively, and like went to some tournaments in that. And like, that was actually cool, but it was also like, I don't know anyone and they're all, you know, 10 years younger than me. So this is kind of weird.
So they would allow you to play other like card games competitively, just not Magic?
Kinda. It was like, you know, just don't really talk about it. Don't really advertise it, and you're probably fine. So I did that, and I was like, I did some content for a Pokemon website. I think I did like 3 articles or whatever, kind of just like under a pseudonym, basically.
Oh, ghostwriting, I got you.
Yeah. So it was kind of weird. Again, rules are a little bit different now. Now you see like all the Wizards employees, like Donald Smith is really big into the Pokemon video game. And there's like a lot of people just like tweeting about team fight tactics and storybook brawl, just like basically they're competitors, you know? And Wizards just realized that like, this is really just kind of stupid, and we should stop policing this, you know, just like let people have fun, let them do what they want to do. It's like, they're in the building, they're working on Magic. They are Magic's best ambassadors also, because they're the people who just genuinely love Magic so much. So it's like, why?
Also, like, even from like an idea, like obviously stealing from your competitor is bad, but like actually like absorbing and like adapting like what other games are doing is like usually mutual beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's funny because they would do that stuff in house, you know. They would look at like, okay,
copy Hearthstone,
Hearthstone's doing this stuff. And I remember when I started, it was like kind of annoying, because I would go in after like a new Hearthstone set came out, and it's just all the people in the development were kind of like me, you know, they're looking for that competitive outlet too. And they would all just be like talking about Hearthstone and like, oh, I hit legend with this deck and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, come on, this game's not even good, you guys. Like, what the hell?
Come join the conversation, the show that you've been wanting. Keep it real with no filter. Weekly we share discussions. WWSD, interviewing creative guests, talking the creative process and sharing all the influences from TV and film. Emmy nominated and winning, yeah, they coming through. Actors and comedians too, directors and writers, way more than a few. Masters of their craft, yes. Tune in, you gotta see. This the podcast that you need. WWSD.